Hello, my witchy friends. It's Victory ASMR. And today I want to read from the Encyclopedia of Superstitions, edited and revised by Christina Hall, and it says it's by E and M.A. Radford. Now I'm going to read to you for about an hour, and we'll see how far we get. It's actually quite a hefty volume. It's not short, and it goes in alphabetical order. So it's a very nice selection of superstitions here. And it says that the Encyclopedia of Superstitions has been quoted by the Times, acclaimed in the United States, and enjoyed by myriads of readers everywhere. The Encyclopedia of Superstitions had been repeatedly reprinted since its first appearance in 1948. The result of years of research by Edwin and Mona Radford, it was revised and much enlarged by Christina Hall in 1961 and took on new life once more. Now it appears in paperback for the first time. It says, fascinating to the layman and valuable to the student of folklore. It explains the origin and meaning of superstitions of today and yesterday, and how ancient beliefs are adapted to modern living. Here are charms once in daily use in dairy and kitchen, spells used by witches and against them, fairy lore and legend, folk remedies and customs of birth, marriage, and death, a book to muse over, not without an occasional chill down the spine. And then there's a review here from the New York Times that says, for an expert investigation of the human will to believe, we recommend the Encyclopedia of Superstitions. So, I also have a little cup of tea, since I'll be reading to you for so long. And this mug, actually, it's hard to show you without spilling the tea, literally, is by my dear friend, Knock Thrice. And she makes all sorts of things. She's been on the channel before. But right now she is making mugs. So this one is called the Persimmon Witch mug. And it has the cutest handle. I'll put a link in the video here if you'd like to go get one for yourself. But I'll be having a little bit of tea just to keep my voice from going. And without further ado, we may as well get started on the Encyclopedia of Superstitions. Okay, let's begin. So the funny thing about this book is that I bought it secondhand, and there's actually a dedication in it, and I love when you find dedications in books that you've bought, because there's like this historical trail that people leave, like from the previous owners. They leave just a little hint of who was there before you. It's really magical. So it says, "Dear Annie, since it's obvious you're never gonna catch a man with your cookin', I think you better start counting on your writing talents to support you. This here's what you call a tool for that kind of work." And then it says, "Don't despair. If all else fails, we'll get you some myrtle next year." And myrtle's a good luck charm, especially for writers. So makes sense why that's referred to on page 242. But if Annie or if Nicole Ann are my subscribers, or if you know an Annie and a Nicole Ann, you gotta direct them to this video. You should find them. Okay, so I'm gonna try and make some really nice page turning sounds for you. And there's a little acknowledgement here about how Edwin and Mona E. Radford noticed that there was a lack of any comprehensive catalog of English folklore. They spent 4 years in collecting and verifying all the superstitions they could trace. And it is already kind of outdated, but it's still known as a pretty iconic text in witchcraft history. Now, if you are new here, please subscribe and join the coven. I'm a witchcraft historian. I do all sorts of videos. They're not always just about the history of witchcraft, but there's plenty more in the future and in my past catalog like this video. So please join us, subscribe, and we'd love to have you. Okay, let's read the foreword here. So it says, "The superstitions listed in this book have all been found to exist in one part or another of the British Isles. Some still flourished there, and others did so until comparatively recently. The majority are not, of course, confined to these islands. Many are universal, springing from hopes and fears common to the whole human race, and most exist in similar or slightly different forms in various parts of the world. Only a very few are peculiar to England, Scotland, Wales, or Ireland. Nevertheless, all are British in the sense that they are, or were, a part of our traditional belief. Considerations of space have unfortunately made it impossible to include detailed comparisons with foreign variants. A really comprehensive survey of that nature would be a work of immense value to students of human thought and history, but it would require a volume, or more probably several volumes, far larger than this one. It is hoped, however, that this short list of British examples, arranged in alphabetical order, may serve as an introduction to a wider study of the subject, and as a handy reference book for those who wish to know something of the superstitions of their own country. Since superstitions are by their nature irrational, it may be asked why time should be spent in studying them. There is, in fact, a very good reason for doing so, quite apart from the intrinsic interest of the subject. This is so true. It's a huge part of why I do what I do. Superstitions are the living relics of ways of thought much older than our own, and of beliefs once strongly held but now abandoned and forgotten. Properly understood, they shed light on the history of our race and help us to understand the thought processes of our remote ancestors and our own deeply buried roots. Absurd as some of them now seem, in the light of present knowledge, all were serious in their beginnings. The study of their origins and later modifications is therefore richly rewarding because it reveals not only the fears and desires of the past, but also the hidden springs of many modern ideas and prejudices. Present-day superstitions are fragmentary remains of forgotten faiths, rituals, and systems of thought, left behind when these faded from human minds as small pools are left behind by the receding tide. A lovely metaphor. Time and the disappearance of the religion or philosophy that gave them birth have made them meaningless and therefore irrational, but have not always deprived them of the power to influence people's lives. When we touch wood to avert misfortunes or drop pins into a wishing well, I've never done that before, or bow to the new moon, we do so only because of a vague idea concerning luck. Our pagan forefathers did much the same, but they were moved by a genuine belief in the sacred character of trees or water or the moon, and their power to affect those who reverence them for good or evil. Because of that belief, their actions were rational. Ours are not, because Christianity and science alike have taught us to think along different lines. Interesting. Yet something older than either drives us to perform the ancient rituals lest bad luck should follow. We are in fact allowing ourselves to be ruled, at least temporarily, by atavistic notions from the depths of the past, thereby opening our minds to old fears and half-beliefs that have no real place in the world we know. Unless living superstitions are much more numerous today than is sometimes supposed, nor are they found only among the foolish or the uneducated. Some ancient beliefs have disappeared for good and all as knowledge advances and habits change. And it goes on a little bit. Omens, astrological prophecies, the spilling of salt, the magpie rhymes. It is this persistent vitality and their long history that make superstitions so interesting and justify their study. To believe in them too deeply, as some do, and allow them to prey upon the mind is foolish, because that is to carry unnecessarily a burden of ancient fears, which ought long since to have been discarded. But to understand them and seek out their true meaning and origin gives us a deeper knowledge of human nature in general, the history of our forefathers and foremothers. Again, as I told you, a little bit outdated, but we can learn a lot from the way that things have changed. Okay, and we're starting with A. And that's the same letter as an ASMR. And it starts with adder. So let's read the entry for adder. The adder, the only venomous snake found in Great Britain, has always been feared by country people, not only because it is, in fact, dangerous, but also because it was once thought to be a creature of ill omen. To meet one and have it live brought bad luck, a belief which has often resulted, and still does, in the unnecessary slaughter of harmless snakes mistaken for it. A live adder on the doorstep of a house was a warning of death for someone living in that house. On the other hand, to kill the first one, seen in spring, was lucky. The man who did so would triumph over all his human enemies during the coming season. A widespread country tradition says that adders, like other snakes, cannot die before sunset, however badly injured they may be. According to some, however, they can be killed outright if they are struck with a stick of ash wood. They hate the ash and will always avoid it, so that a man carrying a branch in his hand or wearing a circlet of ash twigs in his hat is safe even in the most snake-infested wood. Charms were often used to destroy adders, one quoted by M.A. Courtney in Cornish Feasts and Folklore from 1890. was to draw a circle on the ground around the snake as soon as it was seen, mark a cross inside the ring, and recite the first 2 verses of the 68th Psalm. Another was to say, softly and slowly, "Underneath this hazel and mott, there's a braggedy worm with a speckled throat. Now 9 double, says he, now from 9 double to 8 double, from 8 double to 7 double, from 7 double to 6 double, from 6 double to 5 double, from 5 double to 4 double, from 4 double to 3 double, from 3 double to 2 double, from 2 double to 1 double. Now, no double hath he." This was supposed to make the snake twist itself into nothing, and so compass its own death. Okay. The words of the charm had to be muttered in a low voice, for they had lost their power if said aloud. When anyone had been bitten, he could be cured by bruising the body of a dead adder on the wound, by treating it with an ointment made of adder fat. A 17th century remedy was to hold a live pigeon, to the bitten place, until, having absorbed the poison, the bird died. What may have been a later variant of this was the West Country custom of thrusting the injured foot or hand into a chicken. Oh dear. That's kind of scary. But there's all sorts of different things that you can do. This is to do with wound remedy. There's also a bit here about the skin of adder snakes, which apparently have medicinal value. You put one inside the crown of your hat, you can prevent a headache. Tie it around the leg to avert rheumatism. Powdered, these skins cure diseases of the spleen. They can draw thorns or splinters. You can make a prop made from adder. You can hang it on the roof or over the hearth to protect the house from fire. Bring good luck to those who lived there. Interesting. Feels like a good time to have a little sip of tea. I always learn so much from doing these videos because you have to dwell so much on the books, and it's just wonderful. So then there's a section here for adderstone. The name adderstone is commonly applied either to a small stone with a natural perforation in it, or to a certain type of colored glass-like pebble, which is fairly uncommon and consequently has all the virtues of the strange and unusual. Prehistoric spindle whorls turned up by the plow are also frequently so called by those who do not recognize them for what they really are. Such stones were formerly prized as charms against evil and were used in cures for various human and animal diseases. According to tradition, they were generated by snakes who at certain times of the year congregated in large numbers, coiled themselves into a living ball, and while so united emitted saliva which hardened into a stone. Because of their serpentine origin, they were widely used to heal adder bites. Many stories are told of their efficacy for this purpose. One such tale related by William Henderson in Notes on the Folklore of the Northern Counties records how a 19th century Scottish labourer was bitten by an adder, had severe pains and a terrible swelling, but a wise woman, of course probably cunning folk, witchy, healer, who practiced white magic, she was summoned with her adder stone. On her rubbing the place with the stone, the swelling began to subside, kept away nightmares if hung over the bed, and when carried about in the pocket, prevented eye troubles. Although their healing properties are not now much regarded, Their use as luck bringers and protective charms is not yet entirely extinct, and in some parts of Great Britain and Ireland, such stones, especially those accidentally found, are still preserved and handed down as amulets. Okay, we also have adder's tongue fern. The little fern, known as adder's tongue or sometimes adder's spear, was once thought, like most plants traditionally associated with snakes, to have strong healing powers. Because its yellowish-green spike resembles an adder's tongue, it was considered a sovereign remedy for adder bites, since like cures like in folk belief. According to the doctrine of signatures, its snakish tongue clearly marked it as an antidote to the evils wrought by snakes. By a simple extension of the same idea, it was also thought useful in diseases of the human tongue. Nor were these its only virtues. If gathered when the moon was waning, its leaves could be made into a plaster to heal tumors and swellings. Their expressed juice made wound drinks and lotions for sore eyes, in the form of ointments or plasters, by licensed apothecaries. And modern herbalists still employ it in wound salves or lotions. And in some areas, country people make a tea of the leaves and drink it, especially in spring. Okay, I'm curious about age. So you'll see that there are really short entries. So this says age. In some country districts, it is said to be unlucky to tell one's age. This odd superstition is probably connected with the ancient and widespread prejudice against counting a number. Albatross. In the days of sail, an albatross flying round a ship in mid-ocean was an omen of wind and bad weather to come. It was very unlucky to kill it, because like the seagull and the stormy petrel, it was thought to embody the restless soul of some dead mariner. This belief was once very widespread amongst deep water sailors and probably helped to preserve these magnificent birds in the Southern Ocean. But evidently it was not quite universal, for it was not unknown for the less superstitious to shoot an albatross occasionally in order to make tobacco pouches from its webbed feet. Echoes of these time-honored traditions were heard in July 1939 when the cargo liner Calpian Star docked at Liverpool with engine trouble after a voyage from the Antarctic that had been dogged by many misfortunes. Several newspapers reported that the crew blamed these on the presence of the ship presence on board of an albatross destined for a German zoo. On the day after the ship docked, the bird was found dead in its cage, and later, about 50 of the crew staged a sit-down strike because they were unwilling to continue their unlucky voyage to Norway and wished to be paid off at once. In the Daily Telegraph of the 7th of July, the masters reported as saying that it required some courage on his part to bring the albatross on board in the first place. Why this was so, he did not explain. Perhaps it was not necessary for him to do so with a tradition so well known. Probably, he did not himself believe that the bird would bring bad weather or misfortune, or that it was connected with the souls of the dead, but he may have feared that some or all of his crew still believed it. If he did, the subsequent events of the voyage seem to have proved that he was right. Okay, Allen apples. A Cornish name for the season usually known as Hallowtide was Allantide. Until towards the end of last century, it was customary then to give each member of the family a very large apple, called an Allen apple, as a luck bringer. Whoever ate one of those on Halloween would be fortunate in the coming year. If a young unmarried girl slept with one under her pillow, she would dream of her future husband. Like many other Halloween customs, this harks back to the remote period when the year began on 1st of November, and Halloween was therefore New Year's Eve, a proper season for divination and luck-bringing rites. This is why, or a large part of why, in modern witchcraft, we see Hallows Eve, Halloween, as the beginning of a new cycle of the Wheel of the Year. That's part of its origins. Allen apples are still occasionally given to children, but the custom is no longer general, and the magical significance of the fruit has almost been entirely forgotten. Okay, we also have ants. In Cornwall, ants, locally known as myrions or murions, are once thought to be fairies in the last stages of their earthly existence. Legend said that these elfin creatures were through many gradual transformations, always becoming smaller and smaller, until finally, after living for some time as myrions, they disappeared altogether from this world. This brings the ant considerably nearer to the human race than might at first appear, for according to one tradition, the Cornish fairies were once druids, who refused to accept Christianity and so were condemned to lose their human status. Another tale says unbaptized children took this form after their death because of their innocence, but unable to enter heaven because they were not christened. In both versions of the legend, they eventually become murions, and hence it was considered very unlucky to destroy an ant's nest. It was also said at one time that if a piece of tin was put into such a nest when the moon was new, it would turn into silver, provided that it was inserted at a certain fortunate moment, which varied in different parts of the county. Ants' eggs were formerly used in magical compounds intended to destroy love. In Topsell's History of Four-Footed Beasts and Serpents, 1607, the following cure for swellings is given. And there's a bunch here. Okay, the next one is apple. The apple tree seems to have been regarded as holy or magical from very early times, and in almost every country in which it grows. In ancient Ireland, it was one of the 3 things that could only be paid for by living objects, the others being a hazel bush and a sacred grove. It grew in the Celtic paradise, where the hills were clothed with trees that bore fruit and blossomed together. The mysterious land to which King Arthur was taken for the healing of his wounds was the Vale of Avalon, the Apple Vale, which seems originally to have been paradise, though by some later writers it was equated with Glastonbury. That's kind of funny. Even today, almost everyone refers to the fruit eaten by Eve in the Garden of Eden as an apple, though in the authorized version it is simply called the fruit of the tree. We meet the apple tree and its fruits in ancient Greek, Roman, and Norse legends, and in many folk tales, and traces of the veneration once paid to it still linger in some of our superstitions and customs. What else is there here? When the fruit is picked, an apple is left behind and hangs there till the spring comes round again, a death is foretold. There was, however, a Yorkshire variant of this belief. In his Folklore of East Yorkshire from 1890, John Nicholson tells us that it was sometimes thought unlucky to strip the tree completely. An apple or 2, even if only the deformed or inaccessible fruit, should be left for the birds. This was the explanation given in his time, but as he points out, the gift may originally have been intended for the fairies, or some even older spirits. A Hallowtide game, once very popular, was for all the unmarried young people to fasten an apple apiece on a string and twirl it round before a hot fire. Interesting. The one whose apple fell off first would be the first to marry. He or she whose apple remained till the end would die unwed. Oh my goodness, what a fate. If an apple was peeled in one long strip and the peeling thrown backwards over the left shoulder, the shape it made as it lay on the ground showed the initial of the future wife or husband. Another method of divination was for the inquirer to stick pips on her cheek, naming each for a possible husband. I believe by pip they mean seeds. The lover was faithful if the pip burst noisily in the fire's heat, but not if it burnt quietly away. And there's all sorts of folklore surrounding apples and superstitions, and a little bit of conversation about spells, charms. Here's a couple here. A woman who was supposed to have magical powers. She took an apple, thrust 12 new pins into it, and put it into the fire whilst murmuring a charm he could not hear. They were trying to find her sister. Pins have historical connotations. They are always connected to historical witchcraft. Okay, also apple was sailing. Sailing the apple trees was an ancient custom intended to ensure a plentiful crop of fruit. It was formerly observed in most apple-growing districts and is still kept up in some parts of the West Country. Nowadays, no doubt, it is done mainly because it has always been done, or as a frolic. But once it was a serious luck-bringing rite. A little bit of tea. Apple sailing, sometimes called apple howling, was a ceremony of the Christmas season, performed usually on 12th night or Old 12th night, but sometimes, as in Sussex, on New Year's Eve and the days immediately following. The men and boys of the farm, accompanied by their womenfolk, went to the orchard at dusk, carrying trays, pans, and kettles, and a quantity of cider. One tree was chosen to represent all. The company drank to it, threw cider over its roots, and set a piece of toast soaked in cider in a fork of its branches. Sometimes the lowest twigs were pulled down and dipped into the cider pail, or those present bowed 3 times to the ground, raising themselves slowly with the motions of men burdened by heavily laden sacks. These were magical actions to ensure that what was thus initiated would later be reproduced in fact. There's lots about sailing. Oh, apron. In most parts of England, it is considered ominous if a woman's apron falls off, but the nature of the portent variety varies in different districts. In East Anglia, it is also a sign of bad luck of some sort. There's a bunch of different connotations here. Nurses, if they twist their apron strings when dressing, expect to begin some new work soon. To put an apron on back to front is lucky, provided it is done accidentally and is not immediately reversed. If a housewife suffers a succession of small misfortunes in her work, she can change her luck by turning her apron. To turn it when seeing the new moon for the first time ensures that the wish made then will be granted. These beliefs do not seem to extend to the aprons sometimes worn by gardeners, butchers, and other mill workers. This may be because these are always temporary garments put on to preserve the ordinary clothes from dirt. The countrywoman's white apron, on the other hand, was until about 60 or 70 years ago a permanent part of her attire. When dirty work had to be done, a second and coarser apron was tied over the white one. Okay, ash. I think I'm going to use my little Victorian hand clip here, just so that I don't have to hold down the page this whole time. It just slides onto the page like so, and you rest it like that. So it stays just fully flush, and it's really quite nice. Okay, ash. From very ancient times, the ash has been revered as a sacred and fortunate tree, connected with fire, lightning, and clouds. In some pagan mythologies, it appears as an ancestor of mankind. A bunch of different examples. Because of its sacred and magical character, the ash was sometimes considered a dangerous tree to destroy without good reason. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, when transportation was a common punishment for felony, people believed that whoever wantonly destroyed such a tree would certainly live to be transported. Unlike the oak, which is still quite often thought to protect those who stand under it from lightning, it was said to court the flash and therefore to be avoided during a storm, so to attract the flash. But in almost every other respect, it was a fortunate tree and friendly to mankind. It cured diseases. It could be used in divination and charms. Its leaves and wood protected all who kept them in the house or wore them about the person from witchcraft and evil. In Lincolnshire, the buried female ash, locally known as shader, was used to defeat the spells of male witches, and the berryless variety, or heater or header, maybe it's shudder, I'm not certain, to defeat those of female magicians. Snakes detested the ash and kept away from anyone carrying its wood. Sea adders, which we already read. An old Devonshire legend says that the infant Jesus was given his first bath by a fire of ash wood, and for this reason, newborn babies in that county were, whenever possible, first washed by such a fire. In some parts of Scotland, ashwood sticks were preferred by herdsmen to any other because they protected the cattle from witchcraft, and if a beast was struck with one, never did it any harm. 80 or 90 years ago, a certain disease of the limbs in horses, cattle, and sometimes human was widely ascribed to shrew mice, who were supposed to cause it by running over the victims. Okay, it says that every ash tree was once deemed to have healing properties, and all sorts of things here. Worcestershire charm, tree grafting, and just different natural remedies that people used ash for. Okay, this is all ash, and there's like some interesting little things you can say. Even ash, I do thee pluck, hoping thus to meet good luck. If no good luck I get from thee, I shall wish thee on the tree. Even ash, I pluck thee off the tree. The first young man that I do meet, my lover he shall be. And even ash, I pluck thee. This night my own true love to see, neither in his rick nor in his rear, but in the clothes he does every day wear. And there's more about ashes. I kind of feel like, let's move to this one. Okay, this one is aurora borealis. So beautiful. The comparatively rare appearances of the aurora borealis, or northern lights, in regions far south of the Arctic Circle have almost always been regarded as omens of war, disaster, bloodshed, and the deaths of kings and heroes. This is very easy to understand because the people who do not know what these vivid electrical displays really are, it looks as though the skies themselves were burning, or as though fiery spears were being shaken in the heavens by an invisible spirit hand. Hence the name of burning spears, which is sometimes applied to them. Another, and less alarming title, perhaps first given to a slight and mild display, is the Merry Dancers. In northern England, especially in Northumberland and Durham, they are still called Lord Derwentwater's Lights. Wow, that is so interesting. Because of a strong tradition that they are flared all over the sky with startling brilliance on the night when that young and well-loved Earl was executed for his share in the rebellion of 1750. Nor was this the only occasion when the aurora signified disaster for Northumberland. In his Acts of Stephen, Henry Huntington describes how, shortly before the rebellion of 1138 in that county, he saw the whole northern sky aflame with balls of light and fiery sparks, and thought it must foretell either a great effusion of blood or the burning of towns and villages. The ill-fated rebellion that followed brought both. Okay. H.J. Westbrook tells us in his Stockton Heath and immediate neighborhood that when the aurora was seen in that Cheshire township during the 19th century, the people were terrified by it and were convinced that the end of the world was at hand. They were eventually reassured by a sea captain who had often seen it before when afloat. Since then, scientific knowledge has increased so greatly that it might have been expected to destroy this ancient superstition completely. It does not seem to have done so, however, when war seemed likely, but still perhaps avoidable in the early part of 1939. The fears of some were heightened by appearances of the northern lights as far south of London. Nor did it go unnoticed or unmentioned that just before the Pearl Harbor disaster, brilliant displays were seen on 3 successive nights in the United States, southwards as far as Cleveland, Ohio. There's a couple here, so we've moved on to B. And there's a really long section on baptism and barnacle geese, which I've never heard of, and barren ground. Interesting. I'm really interested in barring the way because I've heard of this before as a tradition when you get married. So, barring the way. The custom of barring the way to a newly married pair as they leave the church is still occasionally observed at weddings. A rope or chain is stretched across the churchyard gate or across the road, and the bridegroom has to pay toll before it's lowered. The money is spent on ale or other drinks in which the couple are toasted. November 1953, the Craven Herald and Pioneer reported a wedding at Oberholm, where the gate was chained and the best man paid £3 on the bridegroom's behalf for the right of free passage. There's a couple of different examples here. In earlier times, the bride would have been expected to jump over it. And yeah, it's really fascinating. Various explanations have been given for this custom, the commonest being that in her leap, the bride leaves all her pets and humors behind her. It is possible that it was originally regarded as a form of passage rite, connected with the passing of bride and groom from one state of life to another, as yet untried and new. Okay, bat. In the Isle of Man and along the Welsh border, witches were said to transform themselves occasionally into bats and to enter houses in that form. Mrs. Leather relates the story of a man at Waverley Marsh who saw something like a bat fly into his room. He struck it with his handkerchief, but when he went to look for the corpse, there was nothing there. He said afterwards that he knew from this it was a disguised witch, one of those who then lived upon the march, because a real bat would certainly have been killed by his blow. A Scottish belief recorded in the Wilkie MS was that when bats in their flight rose upwards and then came swiftly down to earth again, it denoted that the witch's hour had come, the hour when witches had power over all human beings, not specially protected against them. In spite of the witch connection, people say it's extremely lucky if a bat falls on any person. Many women outside the island would doubt this because of the very general belief that if a bat alights or falls on a woman's head, it becomes entangled in her hair and cannot get away until the hair is cut. It seems, however, that this is also a superstition without foundation in fact. In The Countryman, spring 1960, there is an account of experiments conducted in 1959 by the Earl of Cranbrook with the help of 3 gallant young women who allowed him to thrust a bat into their hair. 4 different kinds of bat were used, and in each case the creature escaped quite easily without getting entangled in any way. In Oxfordshire, it is a death omen if a bat flies 3 times round a house. When bats come out early in the evening and fly about as though playing, it is a sign of fine weather to come. Children, when they see a bat, sometimes avert ill luck by singing or saying, "Black bat, bear away, fly over here away, and come again another day. Black bat, bear away." Or, airy mouse, fly over my head, and you shall have a crust of bread. And when I brew, and when I bake, you shall have a piece of my wedding cake. Okay, the next one is the bay tree, once sacred to Apollo and to the god of medicine. It's always been considered a fortunate plant, beneficial to mankind, both as a healer and as a protection against evil. For the ancient Greeks and Romans, it symbolized victory, honor, and renown. Letters announcing victories in battle were wrapped in its leaves, and heroes, poets, and the winners at the Pythian Games were crowned with it. The Romans adorned their houses with its look, bringing branches at their New Year festival. Centuries later, Stowe mentions it in his survey of London as one of the plants commonly included in Christmas decorations. It was also carried at many Christian funerals because, owing to its power to revive when seemingly quite dead, it was regarded as a symbol of the resurrection. A very long-lived and widespread tradition said that this tree was never struck by lightning. Consequently, a man standing under it would be safe even in the worst thunderstorms. Growing near a house, it preserved those within from all kinds of infection, particularly that of the plague. The leaves, if carried about, protected the bearer from evil spirits and the contagion of disease. Placed under the pillow at night, they were thought to induce pleasant dreams. A form of divination, not yet quite forgotten, was to throw them on the fire and note how they burnt. If they crackled noisily, it was a sign of good luck to come. But if they burnt away silently, the omen was bad. The sudden withering of bays was held to be an exceedingly evil omen, foretelling either an outbreak of pestilence or the death of kings. Tradition says that all the bays died before the death of Nero, though the winter was mild. Shakespeare refers to this ancient belief in Richard II, Act 2, Scene 4, when he makes the Welsh captain say, "'Tis thought the king is dead, we will not stay. The bay trees in our country are all withered." By an extension of the same notion, it was sometimes thought to be a death omen for someone in the household if such trees die in a garden. Okay, beans. What a curious thing to have in a superstitions book. I need to know more. Beans, like many other plants with strong smelling flowers, are traditionally associated with death and ghosts, and have been so from early pagan times down to our own day. In ancient Rome, they were distributed and eaten at funerals. It is recorded in the Denham Tracts that until about the beginning of the 19th century, a similar custom was observed at some, though not all, North Country burials. When it finally lapsed, a memory of it was preserved in the children's couplet, "God save your soul, beans and all." Wow, I love that. During the Roman Festival of the Dead, held in May, black beans were used in ceremonies intended to placate and ward off ghosts. And in early Greek ritual, the scapegoat who annually died for the people was chosen by means of a black bean drawn in a lottery. In his Remains of Gentilism and Judaism, 1686, Aubrey mentions a charm used in his boyhood to avert evil spirits, which consisted in saying very quickly, 3 times in one breath, 3 blue beans in a blue platter, rattle, platter, rattle. Amazing. A very widespread country belief that persisted at least as late as the end of the last century, and perhaps later, was that the souls of the dead dwelt in the flowers of the broad bean. These flowers are still thought to be ill-omened in many districts. Old colliers in northern and midland England say that accidents in the pit occur more frequently when they are in bloom than at any other time. Cases of lunacy are also thought more likely then, for the scent of the flowers is supposed to induce bad dreams and terrifying visions. A Leicestershire tradition says that if anyone sleeps all night in a bean field, he will suffer from appalling nightmares and will probably go mad afterwards. Another very common superstition is that if in a row of beans, one should come up white, it is a death omen from someone in the grower's family. Then throw the pot away or bury it in a secret place. It says in the leap year, broad beans are said to grow the wrong way up. Various dates are given in different districts as the only fortunate days for setting beans and peas. They seem to spring less from superstition than from agricultural custom and knowledge of local weather conditions. In the northern counties, gardeners should sow peas and beans on David and Chad, whether the weather be good or bad. That is on the 1st and 2nd of March, the festival days of St. David and St. Chad. Farther south, beans are set when the elm leaves are as big as a farthing, or on certain days in early May, often connected with local fairs. A limit to the variety of these days seems to be set by a well-known rhyme which says, "Be it weal or be it woe, beans should blow before May go." A couple other interesting ones here. Bears. Superstitions about bears might be thought rather unlikely in Britain, since the only living specimens here are confined in zoos. There must be many people, even today, who have never seen one. Let's see, dancing bears, bear baiting, performing bears. There's a couple things here. If a child rode on a bear's back, he would never catch whooping cough. He would be cured if he had it. Bears were oftentimes said to return in ghostly form after death. One such haunted the precincts of Worcester Cathedral in the 17th century. There's a quite well authenticated tale of a soldier, whilst on sentry duty in the Tower of London in 1816, saw a large bear coming towards him. He struck at it with his bayonet, but the weapon went right through the creature without harming it and stuck in the wall beyond. And the man fell down in a fit and died a few days later. Okay, we also have beds. There's a lot of superstitions surrounding beds. I feel like it's a very common one. The belief that it is unlucky to turn beds or mattresses on certain days of the week is still quite common. The days vary in different districts, but the most usual are Sunday and Friday. Monday is also avoided in some places. A bed turned on a Sunday causes the sleeper to have bad dreams all the week. In Somerset, whoever turns a bed on a Friday turns ships at sea. In Oxfordshire, to do so changes the bedmaker's look. In Herefordshire, it turns the sweetheart away. An old Lancashire belief was that after a birth, the mother's bed should not be turned until the child was a month old. And the manner of turning it is noticed in an Oxfordshire rhyme, which says, "If one day you would be wed, turn your bed from foot to head." If 3 people take part in making one bed, someone will die in it within the year. The position of the bed also has its significance. Some housewives say that it should always point east and west. If it points north and south, the sleeper will be restless and suffer from nightmares. Others keep to the opposite rule, believing that it is the east-west alignment that causes trouble. A dying person's bed, if it stands across the floorboards, must be moved round so as to point in the same direction as the boards. Otherwise, death will be hard and painful. It is unlucky to enter a bed at night on one side and leave it next morning by the other. I've heard that one before. A person who rises in a bad temper and for whom everything seems to go amiss for no apparent reason is said to have got out of bed the wrong side. Gotten out of bed on the wrong side of the bed or whatever. I've heard that many times. It's a very long section on bees, so we'll read some highlights from that. Bees in antiquity were sacred as divine messengers and foretellers of the future, and in Christian tradition they were referenced as the little winged servants of God. A Welsh legend says their origin was in paradise. They were white when they lived in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve, and only turned brown after the fall. Since then, it has been their privilege to make wax for the altar lights and honey for the use of men, and to worship God by this service and by their hum to anthems of praise. The latter they offer at all times, but particularly on Christmas Eve, when, according to a very widespread tradition, they hum the 100th Psalm in their hives at midnight in honor of Christ's birth. It was long considered sacrilegious to kill a bee because of its holy character. And it is still thought to be unlucky. Bees are or were regarded as the wisest of insects, having knowledge of their future and many secret matters. They cannot live if there is an anger or hatred in the household of their owners, or if they themselves are the subject of a quarrel. Either they will pine and die, or they will fly away. Similarly, they cannot tolerate blasphemy and swearing. If anyone swears in their presence, he is likely to be unmercifully stung. They hate unchastity and can detect it even when it is unsuspected by the family and neighbors of that guilty person. If a bee comes into the house, it is a sign of good luck or of a stranger coming shortly. It must, however, be allowed to stay or fly away of its own accord. If it is captured or driven away, the luck is destroyed. This belief applies equally to the honey and the bumblebee. In Wales, it is believed that a bee flying round a sleeping child foretells a happy life for the sleeper. In some parts of England, it is an omen of war if bees are idle or unfortunate in producing honey. If they nest on a house roof, the daughters of that house will not marry. Children are often said to be safe from their stinging because they love them. Bee stings are believed to avert rheumatism. It is a fact that beekeepers rarely suffer from this complaint, and many attribute their immunity to the stings they receive in the course of their work. Country people say that when the disease is already present, it can be cured by allowing a bee to sting the affected part. There's tons and tons about bees here. So many. It's just amazing. Bees are really magical creatures and so important to the balance and harmony of our world. Okay, there's beetle here. A black beetle running across the floor of a room or found lurking anywhere in the house is a sign of bad luck. If it crawls over a person's shoe or runs over anyone lying down, it is a death omen, either for the individual concerned or for someone closely connected with him. In many parts of Britain, black beetles, though disliked, are sometimes spared because it is considered unlucky to kill them. The result most often prophesied is heavy rain, but it may also be misfortune for the killer. In the Isle of Man, the penalty is 7 wet days and much personal bad luck. These insects do not commonly appear in charms or cures, but one case of their use is a remedy for whooping cough. A lot of remedies for whooping cough, honestly. A relative was visiting a cottage in Lincolnshire when a child arrived with a small paper box in her hand. This she gave to the householder, asking her to put into it the first black beetle she found by chance, without looking for it. The child explained that her sister had whooping cough and that her mother wanted the beetle to hang around the patient's neck. As the creature decayed inside the box, the cough would gradually disappear. Interesting. Okay, bells. The sound of church bells was once widely believed to drive away demons, both those who brought storms and pestilence and those who constantly flitted about the world, seeking to harm the souls and bodies of men. They hated bell music because it was made by holy things, and also because it disturbed the atmosphere in which they had their incorporeal being. And church bells were often pealed during thunderstorms to prevent damage by lightning and thunderbolts. Interesting. And to protect those within hearing from material and spiritual peril. Wherever this bell sounds, as an 8th century form of blessing, let the power of enemies retire. So also the shadow of phantoms, the assault of whirlwinds, the stroke of lightnings, the harm of thunders, and the injuries of tempests and every spirit of the storm winds. Since diseases were thought to be the work of demons, church bells were rung when epidemics were raging. It would get so noisy. In the 16th and 17th century, they were pealed or tolled during outbreaks of the plague. This was recommended by doctors of that period, not on religious or superstitious grounds, but because the clamor was thought to dissipate those heavy and corrupt airs that were then supposed to be the causes of the disease. wow, this is all about bells. There's so much on bells here. Wow. What I'm curious about is besoms or brooms here. Of course, we love witchcraft history, so we want to look at as many witchy entries as we possibly can. The early household besom or broom was made from the broom plant or from birch twigs or heather, and shared some of the traditional lore attaching to these plants. It was also regarded as an essentially feminine tool and was sometimes used as an image or symbol of the woman of the house. If she wished to indicate that she was away from home, she set a besom outside the house door or thrust it up the chimney with its twigs showing above the roof. That witches rode to the sabbats upon broomsticks was a very common belief at one time. They were supposed to anoint their bodies with a salve given to them by the devil, and thereafter to be able to fly through the air upon a variety of sticks or stems, including broomsticks. The choice of the latter as a likely means of transport is probably due to the fertility associations of the broom plant, and also perhaps to the female connection of the besom, though male witches were thought to ride in this way as well as women. In some confessions recorded at the trials, we hear of sticks being used for ritual purposes. Dame Alice Kettler, one of my favorite stories, I really should do a history video on her. The Irish witch of 1323 had a greased staff on which she ambled and galloped through thick and thin. There's a lot of uncertainty. This is very true on the history of broomsticks. Ragwort stems, straws, corn stalks, all sorts of different materials. The besom or broomstick wedding is now usually associated. Okay, what else here? In North Wales today, it is sometimes said that someone has jumped over the besom, meaning that he or she has been respectably married in a church or at a registrar's office. But in some parts of Yorkshire, to say that a woman has done so means that she has had an illegitimate child, and to call a woman a besom is an insult. If a girl accidentally steps over a broom handle, she will be a mother before she is a wife. Mischievous boys have been known to put brooms in places where girls would be likely to step over them without noticing, and to make besoms in the month of May or during the 12 days of Christmas was formerly considered unlucky. Housewives were careful to lay in good stocks beforehand in order to avoid the necessity of making or buying them in these periods. There's actually a section just on sweeping, but I love all of this information about jumping, leaping over broomsticks, the feminine associations, but also that consideration that male witches also use besoms. Okay, and after this, there's Bethany, Bible, there's all sorts of other bees, birch. I'm hoping to return to this book once again. I'll also do a reading on Patreon at some point in the future. I'm actively working on a Patreon for all of you, which will have a wealth of reading videos on it. But we read over 40 pages, which is pretty considerable for over an hour of reading. So I learned a lot, affirmed some things that I already knew about superstitions, and I'm excited to return to this once again for all of you. As you can see, though, it's like a pretty hefty book. There's a lot of information and a pretty considerable works cited, and it's recorded some really great historical things here. So thank you so much for joining me for this video. Again, if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe and join the coven. And I hope that you have an extremely restful and peaceful sleep, free of any superstitious things happening to you, that no bats fall upon you or get tangled in your hair, that there are no broomsticks in odd places in your house, or any apple assailing in your future, or that there's a beautiful bay or ash tree right outside your window. Those are all the things that I can hope for you, and I also hope that tomorrow you get up on the right side of the bed, as we learned the significance of those origins. But I hope to see you again very, very soon, and thank you so much for watching, for being here,